Jesus would support then reparations. Period.
That's not true. Does Jesus say anywhere there about your children and children's children having to pay that? What that parable is saying is that individual is responsible.
Rob, has there ever been reparations outside of war scenarios, and when is it appropriate? Austin, can I have 1/3 of your paycheck to cover what happened to my ancestors? If not, are you racist?
Okay, I'll answer my portion first if you want. Sure, different countries have had different forms of reparations for all sorts of things. In fact, the United Kingdom, I think, tried to officially pay reparations in some sort for the practice of slavery. In the United States, there were reparations that were paid, in, I guess you could call it that, for all sorts of specific things. Japanese internment was one of them, but you would say that's in the characteristic of war. But I would consider it like a reparation if you're unjustly jailed and you were paid. For me, I think you pay the people that were directly negatively affected by the heinous practice. That's something you could potentially do. What you don't do is pay 8 to 10 generations later, or even if we just say Jim Crow and we go to like the 60s, you don't pay 3 or 4 generations later for that. You don't. And we don't look at specific policies like that weren't the federal government. For example, my ancestors are from the North. The blacks in the North weren't victims of Jim Crow like that. And so it becomes very tenuous. So yes, it's happened. No, I think it's a bad thing to hyper-focus on this for all the reasons I said in the closing statement.
Well, and I would just say briefly, I mean, we have to remember that the American president, Andrew Johnson, stopped black reparations in the middle of it. We wouldn't even be having this conversation if he hadn't been a racist and took back the land grants that William Tecumseh McSherman gave, that whole 40 acres and a mule thing. We wouldn't even be having this conversation if Andrew Johnson would have just done what was morally correct.
Now, to be clear, though, just so everyone knows, there was never an official government declaration or promise. Sherman is a person fighting a war and trying to uplift spirits, particularly of slaves, to convince them to join the northern side, whether it be financially, through labor, or through actually joining the military. And to then say, well, that was a promise because one general said this, I don't think that's the case. There's a separate question of whether or not those people deserved recompense. But the idea that this was somehow an official government policy that was reneged on, I just don't think is the case.
It was a good initiative that was stripped away by a racist president of the United States. You're not going to lose points for admitting that. What he did was morally wrong. It was morally incoherent. You can't claim to be a Christian nation and not practice Christian principles. The slaves were the ones that were literally in chains. They fought for their freedom. They should have gotten 40 acres and a mule, period.
It's funny. I'm glad you brought up the Christian point, right? Because I saw in your recent debate you talked about this. I think I think the Bible is quite clear in many verses, particularly in the Old Testament, that we do not punish people today for sins of the fathers, which is exactly what you're speaking to. So even if we accept that the Christian, real quick, even if we accept that it wouldn't have been a Christian thing to have slaves or to not recompense the slaves, it would also not be Christian to pay for reparations now. For example, Ezekiel 18:19-20 says, "Yet you ask, why does the son not share the guilt of his father? Since the son has done what is just and right and has been careful to keep all of my decrees, he will surely live. The child will not share the guilt of the parent, nor the parent share the guilt of the child. The righteousness of the righteous will be credited to them, and the wickedness of the wicked will be charged against them." This is a clear implication that we do not say that people today should be punished for the sins of the past, nor should your righteousness be rewarded for the people that come in the future.
So the Bible also says that a servant is worthy of his hire, does it not?
Yeah, what's that have to do with reparations?
If you were never paid again, I'd tell you the same thing I told Bo. You might want to go look at what the year of Jubilee was in the Bible. It was where all debts would be wiped away and people were actually given an opportunity to reset their lives. Biblically, that was a Jewish principle. And so this idea that somehow you're going to try to use the Old Testament and Ezekiel when the Lord Jesus himself said that a servant is worthy of his hire. And Jesus tells a parable of what happens to the unjust steward. So you can't try to nitpick and select scriptures that you think make you right when the most biblical principle would have been to free those that you brought over here in chains unjustly and to let them have their land. There's no way to skirt around that. Because let me ask you this. Do you think Jesus of Nazareth would have an issue with the U.S. government issuing a formal apology and a reparations program as an apology for Jim Crow?
Well, yes, I ultimately think it would go against the principles.
Based on what evidence?
The apology is fine, but forcing people to pay for the sins of the fathers.
No. Okay. Based on what evidence? Based on what words that Jesus used? Could you demonstrate that argument to be true?
because I think Jesus was largely in concord with the Old Testament that we don't punish people for sins of the father, right?
That's
An
not what I
apology is one thing.
based around the words that he said. No. Based around the words that he said, based around every parable he gave us, can you show me anywhere biblically out of the mouth of Jesus that would indicate objectively he would be against a form of a reparations plan as a recompense for a historical injustice?
No. Can you prove
Exactly.
to me where? Wait. Can you show me where in the Bible he says that? And
Where
secondly,
he says
can you show
that
me
a servant is worthy of his hire? Sure, let's show you.
Okay, that doesn't mean
show you
that doesn't mean that the owner, that the person that hired the servant, his great grandchildren have to pay the great
grandchildren, which is even worse.
Last question on this.
Him and he did unpaid labor.
Last question on this. Can you show me where Jesus said, unless he specifically talked about a covenant being different, that we no longer follow the words of the Old Testament? My form of Christianity still looks at that book.
Say he came to establish a New Testament.
Okay, he said that
come to fulfill the law of Moses. So you might want to be careful.
So your argument is that Ezekiel 18:19-20 no longer applies? And I could give you Deuteronomy 24:6, 2 Kings 14:6, Jeremiah.
Rob, you're not going to tap dance around this. My argument is simple. Can you show me anywhere out of the words of Jesus Christ where, based around the words he used, the parables he provided, where he would be against the government, one, offering an apology for slavery and Jim Crow, and two, offering a reparations package targeted to those two time periods in American history? Can you show me where out of every word he said, he would be against that? You already said no, because you know that he wouldn't.
What you're doing is an analogy. Can you show me what's wrong with Jesus? Can you show me anywhere where Jesus said, let me finish. I mean,
hold on.
It's been a pretty polite debate. I mean,
okay. Very quickly, Rob, don't mischaracterize my argument. I'm not drawing an analogy. I'm asking a specific question about a specific individual.
You keep filibustering and talking over me as I'm giving you the evidence, right? Just because Jesus didn't specifically say this sort of political policy is something I'm against, you can't show me evidence of him saying he's for it. And you're claiming one of the reasons you're for this is because Jesus would be. What I can show you is Jesus never said the Old Testament is scrapped. He said, I'm rewriting the covenant, but let me finish. He does not say that the sins of the father should now all of a sudden be paid by people in the future. He does not say that. Your parable about the servant does nowhere, shape, or form say that if a man does not pay a servant, that his great grandchildren have to pay the grandchildren of the great grandchildren. Can you show me one time that Jesus said that?
As it is written, Jeremiah 22:13, woe unto him that buildeth his house by unrighteousness, that useth his neighbor's service without wages. That's Jeremiah 22:13 in the Old Testament. So we know that they use, and Jesus said that you should love thy neighbor as thyself. And we know the parable of the Good Samaritan, the same parable I gave Chad O. Jackson, where a Samaritan was on Jericho Road, where a man was on Jericho Road and was robbed, and the Jews passed him by, and a good Samaritan, a man of another race, came by and helped him. Jesus said, who was his neighbor? And he said, him that showed mercy. He said, go and do that likewise. So based according to Jesus, we're all neighbors. So Jesus is the fulfillment of the Old Testament law. Based around Jesus' language, we're all neighbors because we're all children of God.
Then give me money.
Therefore, the Old Testament, if it is written, woe unto him that buildeth his house by unrighteousness, that useth his neighbor's service without wages, that means that is an injustice that Jesus would support then reparations. Period.
That's not true. Does Jesus say anywhere there about your children and children's children having to pay that? What that parable is saying is that individual is responsible. The entire Bible, the message of the Bible, and in the New Testament is that you yourself are your keeper. You are responsible for your actions. You are not responsible for the actions of your forefathers. You should not be rewarded or punished based on that. You go to heaven based on you and the actions that you take. And if you accept Christ as your Savior, it is not about, it's the example. Let me finish. I give you the example that you're giving in no way, shape, or form implies that a century later that 6 generations after this person should pay because they're responsible now, 6 generations that are now rewarded. Everyone that's listening can see this. Last thing I'll say on this, even when you talked about debt forgiveness in the forms of the Jewish faith, which again, the Old Testament would still apply, that again goes contrary to your argument. If we forgave debts every 50 years, why would we have to pay the debt of slavery from 200 years ago?
You said at the start of this debate that we are a collective, that all the government is a collective of people. All the government is, it's a collective of individuals. So
When
I
it comes to
accept
payment service.
So we are the continuation of a collective of individuals. So that means that in some capacity, the collective may have to pour money into the pot. That's it. And if you can't refute my argument because it's based biblically, woe unto him that buildeth his house in unrighteousness, that uses his neighbor's service without wages. Jesus affirms the reality of the danger of this sort of way of living when he says that a servant is worthy of his hire, and he gives us the parable of the good Samaritan and the unjust steward. So you couldn't give me an argument that would show Jesus would be against reparations because it doesn't exist.
Let me ask you just
Rob,
real quick.
Last point. I got to go to the next one, but it's relevant to this.
If I could prove that your great-great-grandfather robbed my great-great-grandfather, do you owe me money plus interest?
No, that's not what we're talking about, because now you're trying to individualize something.
But the servant, you have to pay the servant.
Let me respond. You will not individualize something that was systemic. When individual actions start to take place on a mass scale, that's where the term systemic comes from. Black people were systemically seen as property. So don't give me that bullshit response of, if my great-great-grandfather was robbed by X, Y, and Z, should you owe me money? No, we're talking about something that occurred on a mass scale. You can't be intellectually obtuse when it benefits you, and then be intellectually analytical when it does, when you think that it doesn't. That doesn't work here.
I'm no theologian, but I think you have this exactly backwards. When we talk about the individual, you say, of course we wouldn't look at that. We only look at the collective. To me, the spirit of the Bible is saying that we judge people based as individuals, not as collective guilt, and certainly not the sins of the fathers. I think the Bible's ripe with saying that that's not the case. That's not how we judge people.
All right, so this one actually is relevant to, and you guys can kind of finish this up after I read these two. FBNW8PP sends $20. Thank you, sir. He says, you don't blame the sons for the sins of the father. You don't burden future generations with guilt over laws, policies, or actions they had no part in or no say over through collective guilt. That is evil. He followed it up with another 20. Thank you, sir. If you, quote, if you fail, you fail, end quote. Once reparations are given, people will just be told to stop complaining. Sounds good in theory, but in practice, if you give an inch, they take a mile. That's why people say never pay a ransom. All right, you guys can riff on that back where you were a second. Chat's loving it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that. I think people will always complain. I mean, Jesus said you'd always have poor people with you. You'll always have complainers with you too. That doesn't mean I'm going to do anything about it. I'm just not going to listen to you. I don't really have much to say on that one.
Let me to take this in a slightly different way, because I think during my closing statement, I thought you sort of changed an argument. Maybe I misheard the first time. Do you think you mentioned like the war machine? We gave all this money to Ukraine. Do you think they should have to pay it back because we basically saved their ass?
In my opinion, yeah.
Okay. Should you pay back me because my ancestors died saving your ancestors' ass?
No.
Why not? What's the difference?
That's not the same. That's not the same thing.
Why? Both is our country going to war.
Something your ancestors did to mine.
Mine didn't. My ancestors didn't own slaves. They fought to free them.
Okay, so your ancestors fought to own slaves, but why should I?
No. They fought to free them.
Okay, fought to free them. I just said that. What is that? How does that? If I was still the affected class, well, that doesn't make sense.
Ukraine feels they're the affected class.
I don't have by the logic you just displayed. I wouldn't have money to pay you back in that context in the first place. If you fought to free slaves, that's.
No, wait a second. Ukraine feels they're the victim. They feel Russia was the aggressor. They did nothing wrong. And they would say, we're poor now. We don't have money to pay back. And you said, I don't care. Pay it back. Same situation, directly analogous.
So what? Germany had to pay back billions of dollars to the loan sharks. That doesn't. You lost.
But again, Germany was. Do you think that Ukraine was the aggressor in the war?
No, Ukraine was not.
Okay, so Ukraine in this situation is analogous to the slaves. They are the poor victim.
No,
the United States is. Let me finish. Let me finish, please. You can disagree once I outline the analogy. You certainly have the opportunity to disagree when I outline the analogy. They are victims just like slaves were victims, right? The United States gives up their treasure of blood to help them, right? And you're saying, Ukraine, although they're victims, and I feel they are, should pay that back. Same situation here. My ancestors, what is unique about the United States is it fought a war to end slavery. Most of the African countries where your ancestors came from and were tragically brought over here, they ain't fighting a war to end slavery. They're still engaging in the practice. My country fought a war. We lost tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, I think, men fighting that war to end slavery. My ancestors were on that side of it. Why shouldn't you and the rest of the people that were slaves that were freed because the actions of my ancestors recompense me?
You fought to free us from an injustice we never should have had to take place.
Same with Ukraine.
So that doesn't. No, we had no business getting involved in the Ukraine conflict.
What's the relevancy?
The same thing. We didn't
It's
bring
the same in the sense that you.
property. That's a foolish. No, let me respond. That's a foolish notion. If we were brought over here as property and you fought to free us, that is not the same thing as loaning billions of dollars to a country that we literally didn't have to give the money to begin with. That's a stupid analogy.
The idea of whether or not the United States should get involved is irrelevant at this point.
No, it's very relevant.
Let me
because
finish.
slavery was
It
based
did
around
get involved.
property. Slavery was based around.
Let's let Rob get his point, and I'll give you a chance
Oh.
to respond as well.
It did get involved, right? And so you're saying, I think they should have to pay us back. My forefathers that didn't own slaves didn't have to get involved in freeing slaves, but they did, and they died for it. Why shouldn't I be recompensed?
They chose to fight against an injustice well, you should be recompensed, but let's say you should be recompensed, not by Black Americans. No.
Why not? If Ukraine,
we were the class that was affected. That doesn't make sense.
So what? So what? Are you better? Let's go with it.
Are you just saying something just to say it? Like, listen to what you just said. If you fought to free people, that's like saying that the Jews that were freed from the concentration camps should seek reparations from American soldiers that also died freeing them. That's foolish. You don't. Why would you ask the affected class to pay you for taking a just action?
You're the one that said that is Ukraine the victim?
Within the confines of the war, yes, but we're not talking about.
Is it just
comparing oranges to apples here?
No. Is it just for the United States to help them if they're victims?
The U.S. had no business getting involved in Ukraine.
But is it just? Is it a moral, righteous thing to help victims?
Is it a moral, righteous, or just the right thing to help victims? Yes. That is a false equivocation that you're not going to get away with. That's insane. You will
principle still stands.
You will not compare chattel slavery to U.S. government intervention in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Those are two completely different categories, and you're literally committing a definitional category error by trying to introduce that question. That's insane.
Hey, Rob, I'd like to read this one from Zach Gelpy real quick for 10. Thank you, Zach. Hopefully we see you at DebateCon. Ukraine doesn't have the money to pay back the United States, or Ukraine doesn't have the money to pay back the United States either. So what's your point?
Yeah, that's not for me. That's
I don't know what.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to cut in while it was still on the Ukraine topic.
You are right that the argument for getting involved is different. Totally agree with that, right? But once we get involved, the principle still applies. If the principle is the person that's the victim of the aggression shouldn't be the one to pay back, okay, I accept that. And so you'd say Ukraine shouldn't pay us back, Russia should. And yes, you deserve to be paid for the actions of your ancestor, Rob, but not from my people, from the people that own slaves. That would be an apples to apples comparison. But you didn't. You said that Ukraine, who you acknowledge are the victims, should have to pay us back, not the Russians. And so I'm saying that while you are correct that there are differences in the reasons for getting involved, both situations are the victims paying the army that went in and saved them.